to be able to hear outside of what you play. You know how to do a paradiddle diddle and a paradiddle, but do you own it up here or do you own it in here? That certainly for Modern Drummer Festival, I wanted to, put my best foot forward, so to speak. So I took 3 weeks before that event and basically stopped my life.
Hola a todos, hi everyone. This is one of the reasons the internet was created, to join people all around the world, no matter the distance, no matter the language. And if there is a person who can justify this cool invention, is the artist we have with us today. He's played and recorded for Duran Duran, Hiromi, Carole King, Steve Moore's band, just to name a few, and with his own projects like the DICENSO Clark Expedition. His educational work is top-notch through his books, clinics, and his teaching experience in Berklee School of Music, and his playing is at the highest level of everything: deep groove, creativity, solid and full of new ideas and musicality in every beat. Folks, it's 9 p.m. in the East Coast in the USA and 3 in the morning here in Spain, but it's a real pleasure. Please welcome Mr. Dave DICENSO. Hi Dave, how are you?
That was such a nice intro. Thank you. That's so generous, man. Thank you very much, Juan.
You deserved it. Dave, tell us, what is keeping you busy these days?
What is keeping me busy? A combination of things between teaching, writing, producing music, my own music, collaborating with people, practicing, keeping myself in shape, stretching and doing different physical therapy routines that I have to do on a regular basis, or I can't function, the way I'd like to function. So it's time consuming. It's been like that for most of my career at this point, where that's something I do on a regular basis. Although, I should do on a regular basis. Sometimes I fall off of it and I feel it. So clinics, these kinds of things. These kinds of things are what keeping me busy these days. All music oriented.
Great. I told you that this wasn't going to be a biographical interview, but let me say how was my first connection to your playing. I think it was around the late 90s or 2000s. The internet was almost starting, and I was like a crazy looking for information about my favorite players, Kolayuta, Wekel, Dennis, especially their clinics and teaching material. Then typing and searching for the word clinic, I found an audio file from a clinic that you did in somewhere, and from that right moment I put you in my top drummers of all time. This is not for the camera, I feel it from my heart, Dave. But this interview is not about me, it's about you. Dave, what was that moment watching a drummer or non-drummer in your life that you said, wow, this is special, that great inspiration moment in the drumming side or in general?
Man, well, when I think back to the beginning, it was not. Well, yeah, there were a couple of specific instances, like seeing my brother, John, who's 6 years older than me, going to see him play in like school band performances, playing drum set, and he was good. And I just remember, that affected me profoundly. It was basically, for me, when I was younger, it was sports and music. My brother John was one of the first instances I remember just being overwhelmed with, that is cool, and I want to do it. I want to do that as well. You hear so many people who say their first moment was seeing the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, and seeing Ringo and being like, that's cool, and I want to do that. Seeing my brother John and seeing an old friend of mine, his name's Stu Dowie. And he grew up, a stone's throw away from where I grew up. And he was, as far as I can remember, he was the first rock drummer that I ever saw in person.
Yeah.
At least the first one that made me go, yeah, that's freaking cool, and I want to do that. And so between those two, my brother John and Stu, John was more jazz. You know, the drums were tuned more jazz oriented. He played traditionally, swung. And Stu, who I also, again, saw at a very young age, I actually heard music in my backyard one day. I was maybe, I don't know how old I was pretty young, maybe 9 years old, something like that. And I followed the music up the street and through a little patch of woods into the backyard of Stu Dowie's parents' house. And I just, I discovered this music. I followed it. I saw it. And Stu was just raw rock, hard rock and roll kind of drummer, which was more to my liking, actually. So, yeah, like within such a small area, physical area of my life, I was able to find two guys right off the bat who made me, turned my head and made me go, wow, that's cool. I want to do that.
That was a great story, Dave. Those inspiration moments can give us energy for everything, but inspiration is not enough to make us better musicians. We have to practice hard. We need many hours, many years of practice, of good practice. How was your approach to practicing in your heavy practicing days? Dave, how did you organize those days in your early days?
Yeah, it's funny, in a way I wasn't the most organized practicer until I did go through a stretch where I was more organized in my late 20s. But from my teens into my 20s, well, first of all, I picked up lessons again with my dad when I was 17, I think.
Yeah.
I say again because my dad was my first teacher on drums when I was a small boy. And I stopped and I took guitar lessons for several years and played guitar and decided to go back to drums. And I took lessons with my dad, and he was extremely organized, an extremely organized teacher. And so he gave me some structure by way of his teaching, gave me structure in my practice. Anything outside of the lesson material that I was working on was more, I would play along to songs. I mean, I played along to a lot of songs, especially when I was younger, even, in my little guy days, playing along to, Stevie Wonder records and the Beatles and Kiss. And also I did a lot of frickin', just improvising. And a lot of it, was crap. Well, I recorded myself a lot, and I would listen. I'd take a break and I'd go listen back to what was going on. So my dad gave me some structure, hand technique, foot technique, combining the two, reading, snare drum reading, chart reading, drum set, vocabulary, applying rudiments to the drum set.
Wow, that's great.
I always say what an amazing first teacher my dad was to have. He was a great teacher anyway, whether he's your first or 100th teacher, but he did things as your first teacher that not a lot of teachers do.
I'm sure you have known many teachers in your life.
Yeah, and I know, you know what, too? I know through the hundreds and hundreds of students that I've taught over the years, I know what their background is. So I don't know the teacher, but I know what they worked on with their teacher. Did you work on reading? I mean, a lot of teachers, believe it or not, well, maybe you understand this too, but
yeah,
they won't do that. If you're a first-time drum student, a lot of teachers will do repertoire only, playing songs, not necessarily learn how to read, not necessarily learn how to properly, play, technique, and so forth.
Well, we had a lot of luck on Venus. We always had a ball on
your great experience teaching, what are your top advices in order to take the most from our practice session, Dave?
One of the things for me has been, for many years now, keeping a journal. So I almost want to go grab one of my drum journals. You want me to grab one of my drum journals?
Yeah, absolutely.
I've never done this before, like where I've gone to my drum journals.
That's great. Thank you.
So I didn't start keeping drum journals until the mid to late 90s. So like the last 20 some odd years. And I'll tell you something, before I show you the journal, one of the things that helped me tremendously was a system that Mike Mangini, I don't remember if Mike himself told me or if one of our mutual friends who had studied with Mike and studied with me told me, but he's got a system, and you know what? I won't give it away because it's not mine, you know, and I think it's in one of his books, so I don't want to take business away from him, or use his intellectual property, but I'll say his system helped me probably achieve my most focused. I should probably tell him that. I don't know that I've ever told Mike that. Some of my most focused practice that I ever experienced. And basically it's just keeping track of your subjects. You know, what subjects you want to work on, and you know, what goals you want to accomplish. Name your subjects to achieve said goals. Keep track of the time that you spend on each subject and work your way on each subject toward, you know, mastery. And what I did in relation to that was I would keep notes. Here's September 1, 1998, Hingham, Massachusetts. Felt the free, so these are my notes.
Yeah.
Felt the freedom of the mind today. No preconceptions, no expectations. Pictured different, this is cool, man. Check this out. Pictured different fans while playing certain vocabulary. So this is, all right, so this is 21 years ago.
Wow.
I know what I'm talking about there. There have been times where I have to perform by myself, you know, like clinics, for example. And I struggle to find the inspiration sometimes. And I feel like when I'm playing that nobody's digging it, you know, and this is all ego stuff.
Yeah.
And so at this time, I was practicing picturing different people that I know enjoy what I do, like friends / fans, and I would just picture them, and it would like help me. It would help me feel more confidence, more joy in what I was doing, picturing them being like, yeah, you know, this feels good. Check this out. September 7, 1998. Today, I envisioned my wrists, hands, and arms as rubber hoses with water blasting from, what did I say, hands, arms, and with water blasting out of the ends. So like this, in my imagination, was all rubber, and this hand, instead of the hand being there, it was water like gushing out. So this is using visualization in an effort to access more grace, more nature, be more natural.
did you stop writing the journal? Do you still work on it?
I still do. I don't use Mangini's system anymore. I don't really use a system per se anymore, but I do keep journals still. I keep track. I'll write like new ideas if I have new vocabulary ideas, a new groove that I like and may want to write a song based around. I'll jump off the kit and transcribe it into the journal, or just record it onto my phone, or do both. So basically the journal, literally the journal aspect of it, is about just recording your experience so that you deepen the ingestion, you deepen the experience. It's kind of like, you're taking notes on yourself. It's like it's like you're a subject to yourself.
Yes.
You're a subject to yourself. And if you go to school and you study a subject, you're going to take notes, right? So that's what this is for me.
This is great, Dave. You told me before that you were not very organized, and this journal work is really deep organization.
You know what? In a way, that is, you're right. I guess, I did have some organization. And in fact, in many ways in my life, I'm extremely organized. And so I definitely had some discipline in my practice, but I felt like I was a little flighty at the same time. But the journaling, that is a form of organization in itself, like solidifying the things that you're experiencing, these things that are changing your life, these things that you're discovering and experiencing that can change your life if you continue to experience them the next day and the next day, and they become you, versus you just experiencing them once. You don't journal it, you don't necessarily remember it, and 2 months from now you may or may not have actually inputted that information.
Dave, you were talking before about recording ourselves, a very useful tool to make us better. The first time that we record ourselves practicing or in a live situation can be a shock, listening back to the recording. How did you use that information to get better in the past and in the present?
Yes, back in the early days in my teens, I would record myself to, like cassette. And I would listen to it, I would assess it, and I would hear when it sounded good and hear when it didn't. It didn't a lot of the time. It still doesn't to me a fair amount of the time in my life. It's like some people, I can't speak for everybody, but I wonder if you just get so inside yourself that like Porcaro thought, from what I heard, thought his time sucked. Which obviously it did not, at least not to my ears and millions of other people's ears. I still struggle sometimes with enjoying listening to myself. But to answer your question, you listen to, you hear what you don't like, and you make adjustments.
And here, our listening capacity is the key, because
Absolutely.
many people can hear the mistakes about timing, for example.
Right. Another thing that helped me was doing a lot of recording. I started pretty early, just doing a fair amount of sessions and being able to listen back, to myself, for better or for worse, via these different recordings. Often a recording session would send me to a practice room. Something like that I recorded that like gave me some trouble, and so then after the fact I'd go work on that thing. That would happen the other way around too, where I've got an upcoming recording session, I better get to the shed and work this stuff out so that I'm comfortable for recording.
There is an incredible moment for me, and sure for thousands of fans too. It's your performance in the Modern Drummer Festival 2006. I know that you prepared that performance in a very special way, 3 weeks of heavy and very motivated practice, and I think that event was a great motivation to practice.
Right,
Can you share
right.
with us how did you approach that challenge and how did you practice for that, Dave?
I can tell you exactly. First of all, this happened, as you know, in 2006, and I was about 2 solid years into a phase of my life where I was not playing outside of teaching or composing my own music and recording tracks for my own music. No practicing, no performing. By the time that festival rolled around, I was very out of shape to do that kind of playing, and certainly do it and be comfortable doing it. There are times when in my life when I've not played for weeks on end, and I'll sit down and it will just come out and it will be effortless and beautiful and pleasurable and like feels good. And just as many times where you could sit down after weeks of not playing and it feels like crap. I didn't want to risk that, certainly, for Modern Drummer Festival. I wanted to, put my best foot forward, so to speak. So I took 3 weeks before that event and basically stopped my life and meditated, did yoga, rode my bike, warmed up, and shed, 5 days a week for like 3 weeks prior. That was probably some of the most peaceful days of my life that in terms of inner peace. Because when you meditate, 15 days out of 21, and maybe multiple times a day, which I would do sometimes in the morning and night, it changed me. I was like really like, that sounds so cliche, but I was so relaxed. But I was very alert at the same time. I was very on, but relaxed. This is what I knew I was going to do. I knew I was going to do this slow sort of, in my mind, this sort of zig modaliste kind of thing to begin with. And that was going to be like the first movement of the solo. And I would build that and then modulate it to this sort of next part. My parts were basically delineated by these modulations up and down. So part B, if you will, was a modulation up. And then I think part C, I was playing over a blues called Blues for Jay by Jimmy Smith in my head. And I was playing sort of a swing kind of interpretation. And then I modulated again and I went up. I think that's when I was doing that I can't even do it right now. My left foot on the cowbell doing dotted eight notes, almost like a trap kind of thing or a Timbaland kind of thing. And then, so I knew where I was going to begin and where I was going to go and end. I just didn't know what was going to happen, in between, or not even just in between, but within all that. I knew the areas that I was going to be playing in, but I didn't know necessarily what I was going to play.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Dave DICENSO.
That was a great performance, Dave. Congratulations. About the styles, in my case, coming from a rock pop initial point, learning some Latin grooves, cáscara, clave, and ghost notes was for me a big step and made a big improvement in my rock playing. How important do you think is to learn many styles in order to fit your principal style, no matter if it's rock, hardcore, metal, or jazz?
Oh man, that's a really good question, and it's not necessarily a loaded question, but you can come at that from different angles. I'll give you a couple of different vantage points. One is, how important was it for Phil Rudd to be able to play, Songo or Mozambique? I don't know Phil Rudd personally, but my guess, from what I know, when he's not playing in AC/DC, which he's not anymore anyway, but like he wasn't in a woodshed practicing his songos. He was like, I think, working on cars and like, other hobbies, and Phil Rudd is one of the greatest rock drummers of all time, in my opinion. But here's another little angle from that angle, another little vantage point on that same slant is he probably grew up listening to swing music. He's of the age where the popular music when he was a little boy was swing. So he had that, I'm imagining, as they all did, because those dudes could swing, man.
Yeah.
That shit swings, It's like, oh my God, it's rock, but it's rock and roll, and it swings. So, like, can Scott Travis from Judas Priest play, a killing samba? For all we know, he can. But even if he couldn't, I don't know that would make him any less of a killing freaking metal drummer who plays for Judas Priest for the last 30 years, So you got to be careful not to have too much ingredients in your soup that actually makes the soup kind of bland. It makes it unmemorable because there's nothing jumping out as the dominant thing or as a dominant overall thing. So, like the jack of all trades, master of none. There are going to be some producers who, for genuine rock record, are going to call Phil Rudd, for example, maybe over Vinnie Colaiuta. I mean, I'm just speaking arbitrarily. I don't think too many producers are calling Phil Rudd these days, from what I understand. I think he struggles, but like, call the guy who can just do the meat and potatoes, or call the guy who can do the meat, potatoes, and everything else. It's like, if you're looking for meat and potatoes, you're just going to judge the talent that you want to hire based on their meat and potatoes. So it's like, the fact that Vinnie Colaiuta can do everything under the sun doesn't necessarily make him more valuable to that producer who's looking for the guy who can do meat and potatoes. So in a world like today, I would say the more versatile, the better in terms of, existing as a drummer, as a musician, being able to just make your money in music. Versatility, yes, it's really helpful.
Yeah, my point was about how that a little extra knowledge of other stuff different from your main style can make your playing more interesting or special in a way.
I know what you're asking me. I'll give you an example. When I played with the Cro-Mags, hardcore metal, hardcore fused with metal, I was making one of their records with them, and the producer said to me at one point, he's like, you're finessing it too much. You're finessing it too much. And what he was essentially saying, at least how I took it, was I wasn't really getting the essence of the music. It's like I was almost like I was using words that didn't necessarily, or even creating a vibe that wasn't necessarily totally conducive to what the song was trying to say. Not just lyrically, but musically, the impact, the type of impact. So, that could have been my versatility getting in the way, like where if I didn't have that kind of finessey shit in my ability, if I wasn't able to do that, I wouldn't have done that, and that producer might never have had to say that to me. So
Yeah.
so it's a hard question to answer, man, because you could ask a producer that same question, and they might say, I'd want the guy who can rock the shit out of the drums, or the woman, of course, who can rock the shit out of the drum set and give me that rock thing that I need. But I'd prefer that person have a background so I can hear something else in their rock and roll, so to speak.
I spend all my days under
There are two common aspects that I see in the best players of all time. One of them is that they have an unique voice on the instrument, and of course they all have a great time feel, an incredible tempo. And that is something incredible in your playing, Dave, your sense of time, your time in the song, in the groove, and playing like a master around the pulse. Some tips about how to develop our internal clock, being drummers, bass players, of any player?
First of all, thank you. I appreciate that compliment. You know, it's funny, man, because, you know, it's like I love hearing that compliment, but at the same time, it's like I know my playing pretty well, and I've heard myself sound shitty. I know I've heard my time be like, what? Like, what? You know, I still work on it, man. I'm not necessarily working on it day by day, but it's something I know that I'm still improving upon. You know, it still needs improvement. One of the things that I think helps us all the most, from my experience, is subdividing, is verbalizing time and space. And let me put it this way. What I call it in my books, pulse, space, shape, awareness. That's in both of my books, Universal Rhythms for Drum Set, as well as Rhythm and Drumming Demystified. Mastering, I'm going to quote my good buddy Kenwood Denard, who's a dear friend of mine, who's also a colleague of mine. He hipped me to the idea of managing versus mastering. You know, so I've always said, use the term mastering time with your mind. And in my definition, I use the term managing, but you might just call it managing time with your mind. Forget about the mastery. I mean, we're going to be all pursuing that for the rest of time. No pun intended.
Absolutely.
And so, you know, what I'm trying to help people do is learn to activate and manage the time. Activate the time with the mind, manage the time with the mind. Help people get away from activating and managing the time with their body. The intelligence is in our mind. This is the ruler. This is the dictator. This is the mind is telling us what's going on. You know, your mind is telling your head to shake your head, you know, to nod your head. You know, it's like, so you can do that by counting and listening to what you're saying. Pulse, space, shape awareness. Okay, so for example, in Rhythm and Drumming Demystified, I'll take what I call Rhythm Code 2, which is the permutations of a quarter note. So Rhythm Code 2 on page 42 is the permutations of a quarter note based on a 16th note grid. So your first figure is 1 in, a 2 in, a 3 in, a 4 in. So what I'm doing with my voice right there is I'm accentuating the figure. That's the shape. The that's the shape that's being created right now. And I'm articulating the space, which is the space in between the shape. And I'm articulating the pulse, which just so happens to be the same thing right now as the shape.
Yeah.
So, right. But if I go to figure 2, where I'm emphasizing the E of the beat, that sounds like this: 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E. So now I'm still articulating the pulse because I'm saying 1 E, 2, 3, 4. I'm articulating the shape of the figure, 1 E and a 2 E, and I'm articulating for all the space in between. So if I listen to that, the way I perceive it is I'm training my mind to own the time. To own the time. What's another way of saying own the time? To be able to manage the time, process the time in real time. In real time. Clave, for example, you want to master the pulse, the space and the shape of 1 bar clave in a 16th note grid. That would sound like this: 1 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4, or 1 2 and a 3, off, and a 1, out, and a 3, 1, out. Now, so as we develop our ability to manage, to process pulse, space, and shape, we can then add something that counters that we have to manage in real time. For example, we take the 1-bar clave as the constant, and I do this version, 1, and datu, yan, 3, and dafo, yan, and then I go through rhythm code 2 with my hand clap. So now I own 2 sides of the conversation. We could call one side the accompaniment and one side the melody. We could call the melody the 1-bar clave. Let's say that's the melody, but that could eventually lead to improvisational expression, like using the multiple figures in rhythm code 2, forming them to create longer phrases. So before we do that, we just do each figure separately against that 1-bar clave, so that we practice, because you're asking me about time and feel and flow. You have to, and what I haven't said yet, but I'm alluding to, is you have to be able to hear outside of what you play.
Absolutely.
You have to be able to hear really well outside of what you're saying. And so I've developed systems of using my voice and my hand clap and voice and my drums to develop that very skill, hearing outside of what you're playing. So, for example, here's the constant: 1, yan, 3, da, yan, 1, da, and 3, up. So you get nice and comfortable doing that. 3, up, and 1, and da, yan, 3, and da, and 1, and da. A lot of people, when they say the da, they wanna clap their hand, but that's not the melody. The melody is just the 1, and da, and right. So this begins a sort of separation, a process of separation, so we can become conscious in real time of more than one thing.
So using our voice as our 5th limb, using it as a principal part of our coordination. Yeah?
Yes, and that voice is directly tied to the mind. So in a way, the mind becomes sort of a limb, but the master limb. I'm telling my students all the time, prioritize your voice, prioritize your voice, prioritize your voice. You know how to do a paradiddle diddle and a paradiddle. Okay, you're 22 years old. You can play your butt off. You know how to go like this and play there's your 1-bar clave. Paradiddle diddle, paradiddle diddle, paradiddle. Right? You know how to do that, but do you own it up here, or do you own it in here? We want to own it in here.
Yes.
If we own it here, the ownership will be here too. If we own it here, there's no guarantee that we own it. You know how to play a paradiddle diddle and a paradiddle. You just got to play 2 paradiddle diddles and a paradiddle and repeat that with the left hand lead. You can do that. Focus on your voice, because your voice is what's telling you whether you can hear outside of that paradiddle diddle, paradiddle diddle, paradiddle. Can you go 1, 1 and a 2, 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a E and a 2 and a E 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 and a
Oh, I feel like I lost myself. The truth is very hard to tell. Well, my head is a mess, but I got to do my best because
We can learn it first without the drums and save a lot of time when we are in our practice room with the real drums.
Yeah, and you don't have to be a drummer to use a lot of this. Any instrument that you don't play with your lips, any instrument you don't play with your lips, you can work on this very same system, and then eventually you will replace your hand clapping with your instrument.
This is very related to the voice topic, an incredible topic, by the way. In my interview with John Patitucci, he told us about the timing and internal clock equation that he recommended to his students to play a bass ostinato and sing drum rhythms or improvise drum parts with their voice over or along to bass guitar ostinatos, just to improve their groove, their time feel.
Absolutely. You know, what I find so helpful is your naming. When you name, and again, I say this in the books, when you name every component of the time as it's going by, where you actually assign it a name, not just a sound. And I'm not slighting any other's version of doing this, but there's something to giving each component of the time a name, like 1, dot 2, and 3, dot 4, and because you could go boom, 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 while you're playing your bass ostinato, and I know there's value to that. I would offer that it would behoove anybody to also, you could go boom, and boom, and you could mimic that kick, snare, kick, snare, boom, and boom, and and be naming every component of the time at the same time.
About teaching and learning, Dave. You have great experience teaching in clinics, private lessons, teaching in Berkeley, and through your books. What aspects do you think that the students, young players and not so young players, overlook the most in their learning process?
The devastating importance of going slowly. Meaning, so many students, when they're encountering new material, stuff that challenges them, they don't go slowly enough. They don't transcribe. I teach a lot of concepts, so I'm not the type of teacher who's giving students like completely transcribed stuff. I'm saying, check this out. Here's your concept. This is what needs to happen. You should transcribe anything that you can't see it or hear it, then you should transcribe it. In other words, if you don't already own the frickin' material, or at least be able to ingest it and begin to put it back out, you should transcribe it. And you should go slowly, and you should count. Here's another one, man, is literally hundreds of drummers over the years. I've asked them to sit farther away from the drums because, in my opinion, they're sitting too close to the drums, and it makes drumming harder. Sitting too close to the drums makes drumming harder. Mm-hmm. And I've had some amazing students. I can think of one guy in particular who's, he's a legendary drummer at this point. He's a great drummer. Adam Deitch was sitting. He came into one of his lessons saying that his knee was killing him. And I didn't know Adam yet that well. We'd only had a few lessons. And I didn't really check out how he was playing. I just knew that anytime he played, he sounded really good. So a lot of times when I hear someone play and I hear something in the playing that's a little like bugged out, I'll walk around and look at what they're doing. What's creating this feeling or this sound that I'm not really digging? I never heard that in Adam, but so he comes to me, so I never looked until he came to me and said, my knee's been killing me. It's a problem. It's been a problem. It's like really a problem right now. And I said, let me see you play. I just want to watch you play. And that was my immediate diagnosis, was you're sitting too close, man. And he stopped sitting too close. But like I said, hundreds of drummers over the years, It's a very common thing that gets overlooked, to answer your question.
And what's the possible reasons for that, Dave?
Well, I actually have some sort of I think there are psychological reasons for that. I used to do it too, by the way. I used to sit too close to the drums. I think it's pretty natural, actually, to do that, to do the unnatural. It's unnatural to sit too close to the drums. But what is natural for human beings is when they want to control something, they tend to get up on it. You want to control your child, because they're like wild, you got to like rein them in, ground them, whatever, you know what I'm saying? You want control, you wrap your arms around something. I really feel that's part of it. We just innately, we approach the drum set when we're younger and we want to friggin' control that thing. So we get on top of it. We sit too close and we ultimately make it harder for ourselves.
About learning from others, there are so many things that we can learn from others who don't play our instrument, but that lesson affects directly in our playing. What concrete lesson or experience from others non-drummers made you a better player, something that affected directly to your playing?
The only thing that I can come up with off the top of my head is learning from different sources learning about my mind, learning more about myself and how I operate as a human being has helped me tremendously as a human being, but as a drummer as well. It's directly affected the way I approach the drums, my philosophy about being a drummer and how to play the drums and my role and so forth and what music is to me. I had been a couple of times in my life to see psychologists, not a psychiatrist, but a psychologist. Basically the same thing, but one administers medication and one doesn't, right? And this one woman that I saw, she would say things that would directly impact my life, which would directly or indirectly impact my art, so to speak. And she turned me on to some reading, some resources that had the same effect, directly impacted my life, indirectly impacted my playing, as well as meditation in general, in terms of something like, outside of another drummer inspiring me and changing my life, which obviously we all have those. These are some things that outside that box that did have impacts on my playing. I can't think of anybody in particular. Probably, whoever told me, which if more than one person in my career has told me you're playing too much. So whoever those people were, hopefully you listen to those people and you determine what your opinion is. Because maybe you're not playing too much. I think I was. I mean, I don't argue the point. I know that I, played too much when I was younger at times, in certain situations. So anybody who had the wherewithal to tell me that, thank you. I forget who you are, but more than one of you have said that to me over the course of my career.
About touring, I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, that some years ago you decided to stop touring, stop working as a sideman for artists. I think because you wanted to have your band, your music, and keep a balance between family and work. So you are the perfect person to do this question with all your experience in all the situations. What would you say to any player that want to make a career touring, those aspects that maybe are not so obvious out of the stage?
Well, it depends on where you are in your life. It also depends on just what type of person you are. Yet I can only really speak from my own experiences and who I am and my values. And it's not even so much about values. I know many people who are on the road all the time who don't love their family any less than I love my family. But this that's how they make their money, and maybe they don't have an alternative, or maybe they even do, but they like that better. They'd rather be earning their money on the road. For me, what I would say is being on the road, you know, if you don't like flying a lot and you don't like being in airports all the time, you have to consider that because you're going to be doing that, a lot of that. If you have a partner at home, someone you love, a girlfriend, a boyfriend, and you want to be faithful to that boyfriend or girlfriend, you know, it gets pretty lonely. For me, I've also experienced a lot of boredom off stage where, you know, you can't really practice if you're a drummer. You know, if you're playing 3 or 4 nights a week, that gives you 3 or 4 nights a week off. So you know, if you're on the road for the better part of a year, that kind of means you're not practicing. You know, I've been on the road at times where that didn't bother me because I wasn't caring to practice. But that changed. I've gone through phases in my career where I've practiced for chunks of years at a time, and then not practice for chunks of years, and then I practice and not practice. But if you're into practicing, you know, you can't really do it on the road. In a way, the road is freaking awesome. It's like, it's especially if you're playing music that you dig with people that you dig. There are aspects of touring that I love and that I miss, you know. But, you know, the other thing is it puts everything else that you may have going on in your life at home, it puts it all on hold. That's the life of a touring musician.
Dave, what's next? What is in your schedule for the future?
More of the same, teaching and writing, and I'm trying to get more stuff, more product produced, like more music produced, finished product for licensing, as well as my own performances. Basically, a combination of teaching and producing.
Dave, it's been a real pleasure talking to you from Spain to Manchester in the States. Here it's 4 in the morning, but I don't care, it's been amazing.
Woo!
The internet is great for joining people. Best of luck on the road, in your studio, your music, everything. Thanks, Dave.
Juan, thank you. I had a great time, man. Thanks a lot.
Take care.
Take
Ciao,
care,
amigo.
man.